Thank you for tuning in to Metal Exchange. I'm your host, Mike Maharrey. Today I'm going to be talking with Michael DiRienzo. He's the executive director at the Silver Institute. So we're going to be talking all things silver. We're going to talk a little bit about the impact of the pandemic, how the market has rebounded since. We're going to talk about Fed monetary policy, how green energy is impacting industrial demand for silver. And we're even going to get a little bit into the Reddit raiders and how they impacted the silver market. So without further ado, I will bring Michael on. Michael, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate you taking a little bit of time out of your day to talk silver with me. How are you?
I'm doing great, and thank you for the opportunity, Michael. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Silver is one of my favorite metals because I can afford it. So
Yeah.
I like talking about it. But before we get into the markets, I'd like for you to just take a few moments and give a little bit of an overview of what you guys do at the Silver Institute.
Sure, absolutely. So, interestingly, the Institute is actually celebrating its 50th year of existence in
Nice.
2020. And when it started, it was really a technical outfit. It produced papers on behalf of or for our member companies. At the time in the 70s, the hot topic was photography, and a little bit of silver investment. But then as the years went by, it sort of formed into a sort of a marketing association. So now we are set to and programmed to market the metal. So our members are mining companies, refiners, wholesalers of silver-based products, transporters, and so forth. And what we do is, we want to encourage the development and uses of silver and silver-based products. We want to help develop markets for silver and those products. We help sponsor research and so forth that will hopefully at the end of the day lead to greater silver demand. And of course, we collect and publish statistics on the market itself. So that could be anything from our World Silver Survey to our bi-monthly silver news to our outlook on the market at the beginning of the year, the middle of the year, and the end of the year, and so forth. So that's what we do. We have a relatively small budget when you compare it to other metal-based organizations, but we do a lot with a little.
Yeah, y'all do a great job. I reference your reports quite often, just looking at the overall supply, demand, those type of
Sure.
dynamics. I don't think anybody does a better job of getting that information out there and distilling it. So,
Well, thank you.
along those lines, let's talk a little bit about the silver market. I kind of wanted to start with a broad overview. Obviously, the pandemic has wreaked havoc on everything in the world, and I know that it's certainly had impacts on the silver market. Can you give kind of a broad overview of what we saw in 2020, and then how it's kind of evolving as we've moved halfway through 2021 now?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. 2020 was a challenging year for just about every industry across the globe, and silver was really no exception. We saw lower silver supply coming to the market. That was based really on a 6% reduction in mine production. We saw 7% increase in scrap supply, and overall demand decreased by about 10%. And it was really all a byproduct of the pandemic. So it touched silver in a rather unique way. Industrial demand fell by about 5%. It really hit a 5-year low last year. And that was really led by India, which was down by about almost 30%.
Right.
And Europe was down as well. And China was down about 8%. So we saw some modest gains in North America and Taiwan and Japan. But if you look at on a sectoral basis, photovoltaic demand actually increased 2%, whereas jewelry and silverware dropped 26 and 48% respectively. And that was really due to the pandemic,
Right.
And the shutdown of retail stores and factories. But one area where we saw a lot of growth was in investment demand last year. And that was covering both institutional and retail investors. So ETP, silver exchange traded products, grew by over 300 million ounces last year, 331 to be exact.
Yeah, that was a record, wasn't it?
It was a record, yeah. It drove it over 1 billion ounces for the first time, and we're still over 1 billion ounces today. And that happened in July of last year. So, the retail demand was equally as strong.
Right.
So, and that was pretty much fueled by the onset of the pandemic, lower silver prices at the time, and just an unprecedented wave of quantitative easing.
Right.
We saw physical investment jump about 8% last year. Pardon me. And that was led primarily by the United States. And it would have been even stronger had it not been for pandemic-related supply disruptions.
Right.
So in terms of getting these blanks to the mints and so forth for production, we saw big premiums and big downside risk to the investor from a wholesale perspective as well.
Right.
So even exchanges did great last year. As a matter of fact, the Shanghai Futures Exchange overtook the COMEX last year to become the largest exchange for silver futures. And of course, that leads you all to the silver price,
right,
which was averaged about $20.55, which was up 27% from 2019. Okay. So it wasn't all bad in 2020.
Yeah, I knew the investment demand had gone up. I did not realize that the Shanghai had done that well. That's interesting. So let's look a little bit more specifically at the kind of industrial demand. And that's kind of one of the big differences, obviously, between gold and silver. You have much more of a industrial outtake with silver as opposed to gold. But we've seen a shift over the last decade or so in that. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, look at industrial demand is over 50% of the entire demand sector. So you factor in jewelry and silverware and investment, you're still looking at over 50, 52, 53% is going to the industrial side. And we think it's had a strong first half of the year. We think it's going to maintain its growth during the second half. And this is all, of course, provided that these global economies are starting to recover. And we're seeing that in the United States. We're seeing that in China. We're seeing that to a certain degree in certain European countries and so forth. Where we're not seeing it right now is in India. And that could be a downside risk to industrial demand down the road. But, we have a shortage of semiconductor chips.
Right.
I don't know if that's going to get better in Q3. In the automotive segment, the recovery in vehicle production should underpin silver demand later this year. And we remain very optimistic about the photovoltaic sector. We think new capacity additions this year will exceed 150 gigawatts. And this should, in turn, lift overall silver demand in this segment, despite in that particular application reduction in the silver's holdings.
Right. Do you think with the particularly solar, but more broadly with the green energy, I think in some ways it's, I don't want to say recession proof, but given that there is so much interest at the government level, to push these initiatives, do you think there's probably a little bit more support there? And maybe that's why we saw the solar demand maintain even through the 2020, the peak of the pandemic.
I mean, absolutely. When you look at silver as a green energy movement, okay, so silver plays a key role in solar panels, right? And it has been since we started tracking this in 2008, 2009. And the optimism for silver's green energy demand remains really strong. We like to think of silver as a decarbonization metal, and it's not just in solar panels. We think that the combination of a global effort to reduce fossil fuels reliance legislation to lower carbon emissions and favorable government tax policies should result, we think, in a continued expansion of solar panel installations over the next decade. I mean, all you have to do is look at the state of California, and they have mandated that new housing facilities, new complexes be fixed with solar panels for their electrical working. So that's a plus side for silver. We think that silver, when we first started tracking this, was about 60 million ounces of silver in 2011. And we think that it'll be about 105 million ounces this year.
Wow. Yeah, that's a big increase.
Yeah, and then if you couple that with clean energy with respect to electric vehicles,
right?
We saw what the President of the United States did just last week with his EV goals. This is something that's really going to drive silver loadings in vehicles. We think that, we did a report earlier this year in January on silver's use in the automotive industry. And we think that at each stage of the transition from internal combustion engines to battery electric vehicles, and before that hybrid vehicles, to eventually autonomous driving is going to be a plus for silver.
Autonomous driving creeps me out a little bit.
yeah, I'm right with you. Okay.
I don't know if I want my car taking me where it wants me to go, but that's a whole different ball of wax.
Exactly.
So looking at this, I mean, that's certainly a plus for demand. Let's kind of look at the supply side. Obviously, you mentioned that there was a pretty big decrease, and that makes sense. I'm sure a lot of mines were shut down during the pandemic. But I know also we've kind of seen a little bit of drop off in mine production, even in the couple of years leading up to the pandemic.
Yes.
Are we going to be able? Do you feel like that the mine production is going to be able to keep up with this demand?
I think it will, but I also think that in 2021, it's obvious. We think strongly that it's going to be a better year than it was for our mining members than it was in 2020. We initially in January of this year had said that we forecast an 8% increase in mine production, and we also were looking at an increase in scrap supply coming to the market.
Right.
I don't know if it's going to be quite 8%, but if you look at one of the largest mining companies, the largest actually, silver producer, Fresnillo, they had a 2.7 increase in the first half of 2021, and it puts them on track to meet their 2021 guidance. So we're starting to see that through a wide range of mining companies as they're reporting their second quarter figures today. So I don't know what that number is going to be now. And there is some downside risk, of course, to that number. You've got COVID, you've got the Delta variant, you've got Lambda variants, and you also have the second largest mining country in the world in Peru facing a new leader who wants to sort of nationalize the mineralization of Peru. So we don't know just now. We'll have to wait till later in the year to get a better determination of that.
Right. Now, am I correct? I might be making this up, but I feel like that I've read that there's quite a bit of silver mined that is actually kind of a secondary product with other like copper mining. Is that correct? Am I
Yeah, it's a unique metal in that only about 30% of mined silver, and this has been the case for many, many years, comes from what's known as a primary silver mine. So a primary silver mine is a mine that produces about anything over 50% of silver, and the rest of the silver that comes out of the mines really comes from gold, lead, zinc, and copper mining activities.
It's interesting. Why is there? I feel like there's a lot more scrap that comes out of silver than, say, in the gold market. Why is that?
It's just it is what it is, and the fact of the matter is that we've seen down years, and the last 2 years we've seen an uptick in recycling, and last year, especially in the second half of the year, it had a lot to do with people trading in and scrapping primarily their gold jewelry, their gold artifacts, and then just sweeping silver into it.
Yeah.
So 2020 we saw about a 7% jump in recycling coming to the market, but it really mostly came from jewelry and silverware. And India, ironically, provided most of those gains as consumers and individuals in India were scrapping their gold and silver out of their personal holdings. Yeah. We also saw an increase on the industrial side, especially in the ethylene oxide market, where they're swapping out silver through the catalyst, putting new silver in, but taking the old silver out for recycling. We're not seeing much coming back to the market these days with photographic scrap, as you may imagine. And we also saw a somewhat reduction in coin scrap last year. Now, we thought initially that at the beginning of the year that scrap supply would actually be at about 7 or 8% like it was last year. But, the price of silver is, in the $24 range today. Right. And we've seen it hit as high as 30 in early February. Mm-hmm. But the fact of the matter is it is sort of price sensitive. Right. When you go back to 2011 and 12 and 13, when the price was bucking up against $50 an ounce, scrap supply was even higher then.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I wrote a report a while back, interestingly, on India and the fact that a lot of people, particularly in some of the poor rural regions, their silver mm-hmm. and gold jewelry was a lifeline. As they faced the difficulties of lockdowns and those types of things.
It's true.
Another fun fact, the Japanese, for the Tokyo Olympic Games, the medals, the metal in the medals, which are primarily silver. A lot of people don't know gold medals are mostly silver.
Yes.
Every bit of that came from scrap cell phones and electronic devices.
It really did, yeah. And it was interesting because the Japanese... The residents, the population of Japan, did their part in helping getting their old materials to the Olympic Committee for those medals. But you don't want to stop there with just the Olympic medals. Right. So the gold medal is primarily silver. Yeah. It's got a gold plate. Right. The silver medal is all silver. Right. And the bronze medal is, I think it's more of a copper lead type of metal.
Copper nickel, I believe.
Copper nickel. Okay. So, but when you look at the trophies of the major sports in the United States and throughout the world, they're all made of silver. Yeah. I mean, silver really is for champions. The America's Cup for sailing, the Super Bowl trophy is made of silver. Right. The World Series trophy is made of silver. The tennis trophies for Wimbledon, the plates and so forth, are all made of silver. So when you look at the end of the day, it really is silver that should be at the top, and gold should be secondary.
You missed the greatest trophy of all time, the Stanley Cup.
The Stanley Cup, yes. Which we just saw here in Washington, D.C. a few years ago, all made by silver, all made with silver. And, what's interesting about that is that the players take that cup around. I saw a couple players at bars pouring champagne into the cup and drinking it, and then they go on and take it home or whatever.
Yeah, I'm a big Tampa Bay Lightning fan, so we've had.
Well, you're in the right place. Then.
Yes, so we've had it 2 years in a row. They actually, Pat Maroon actually dropped it and dented it, so they had to send it up to Montreal to be repaired. Which is another thing about silver; it's very resilient.
It's very resilient. Absolutely, you can fix it.
Yeah. So, let's talk a little bit about what's going on with the monetary policy. You mentioned it briefly, but we've seen unprecedented quantitative easing. There's talk that they might taper, might not. Who knows? The fact of the matter is, right now they're not. So, do you see this continued inflationary pressure? We really haven't seen it move either gold or silver in the last 6 months or so. What's kind of your take on what we're seeing in the investment world right now?
Well, it's interesting because, you talk about tightening and so forth, and no one really knows. Right. The governors know, the chairman knows, but
I'm not sure they know sometimes.
They may not either. You never know. But, I mean, it does present a downside risk. I guess the question is, has that downside risk already been built into the current price? Yeah. I mean, we saw last week, for example, those really strong U.S. non-farm payroll numbers. Right. It started, the catalyst of a downward pressure on both the gold and silver price. And when Sunday nights open in Asia, only added to that, and we're just today starting to recover some of that price activity. I don't know. I'm not so certain the Fed is going to raise rates as soon as some people tend to think. But there are others out there that think that this has already been baked into the current silver price and gold price. So we'll see where it goes from there.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I feel like they might give it a shot. I'm not sure that they can tighten significantly, given I feel like that the monetary stimulus is a big part of the recovery. So, they have to walk that line of trying to fight inflation and keep the economy going.
And Mike, let's not forget the fact that we are almost at, I believe, we're at $29 trillion in debt.
Yeah.
When you factor in this recent $3.5 trillion bill that was just passed yesterday. So, I mean, the debt, the interest rates, everything, and the amount of money that's still being pummeled into the economy today by the Fed. And, there's an opportunity for this administration to completely transform the social structure of the United States for generations.
Yeah.
And it looks like they're going to try to do it. And I don't know if they're going to be successful, but that means that more people will be living off the government than they are on their own. And is that good for silver and gold? I don't. It probably at the end of the day, it maybe is.
Yeah.
But we will see.
Well, I think you make a good point about the fact that the it may already be baked in. You kind of see that sometimes where they call it buy the rumor, sell the fact.
Right.
I wouldn't be surprised if when they actually tick it up 25 basis points and all of a sudden we actually did see that back in 2016 when they raised interest rates the first time after the financial crash. Gold actually and silver both actually started to climb at that point.
True.
What's kind of your take on the whole Reddit thing? We saw a pretty big price surge a couple of months ago when they decided they were going to try to pull the squeeze. My feeling's always been that the silver market's a bit too big to do kind of what they've been able to do with the AMC stock. But what's kind of your take on all of that?
Well, it's interesting because, our point of view is that, the interest in silver in late January and early February was just fantastic. Mm-hmm. I mean, you really had a social media campaign started with Reddit that spread to Twitter and other social media platforms that really galvanized, we think, a new generation of silver investors, and they're still in the market today. Some of this was done because they proposed there was a systemic shorting of silver by major financial institutions, which created in their minds an opportunity to trigger a short squeeze. Right. The market is just too big for that. Now, if you're looking at Game Boy or BlackBerry or some of AMC, you may have an opportunity to shift it in a major way, one way or the other. But the interesting thing was this just wasn't physical silver. They were buying ETPs, they were buying the PSLV, they were buying the SLV, they were buying coins and bars, and even to this very day, it's still very difficult to get your hands on, in a very timely manner, an American Eagle.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a long wait, there's a higher premium, and we think that those folks that are involved in that movement will be involved in this movement for a long time because, one, they're passionate, two, they're very smart, and three, they think so highly of silver. I just don't think it's going to go away.
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned the Silver Eagles because that's one of the places where you've seen we saw the big COVID disruptions. I think they actually had to shut down one of their production facilities for a while. So, that takes a long time to catch that back up. And I know for SchiffGold, there's been there's shortages and high premiums, and people get mad. Oh, why is the premium so high? Well, because the product's just not out there.
Right.
Do you pay much attention to the silver gold ratio? That's something that a lot of investors like to look at. And it kind of had narrowed back down to around 64, 65, which is getting closer to kind of the modern
Yeah.
average, but it's kind of spread back out again. I haven't looked at it in the last couple of days, but it was starting to kind of widen. Do you pay much attention to that?
Well, we do. We do. We think it's indicative of where the both metals market is at this any given time. You know, the silver price in relation to gold was pretty strong leading up until about mid-June. We saw silver price tumble to below 24.50 in late July, and that was basically the first time since April. It was followed by a quick recovery up to about 26. And the reversal from around June 16th saw that ratio widen from 67 to above 73, right. Which is a level we last saw really early in 2021. We think that you see this also through a decline in COMEX positions, which experienced a 26% fall in June. Net longs fell by about 36% in July. You have that news, but then you also have news about individual investors dominated in the ETP arena, and they really remained unchanged after the 1% drop in June. So there is a strong belief out there in a firm recovery in the silver price.
Yeah, I think that's fair, especially if we can continue to see the global economic progress. And you mentioned India. I think maybe you said they were a little bit slower in rebounding, and perhaps that's because their kind of second wave of COVID kind of came earlier. I mean, we're just now kind of starting to see that here. And I know I was looking at some of the gold stats the other day, and there was certainly a bit of a rebound in the gold demand in the very end of the second quarter as that wave kind of passed by. So, perhaps we'll start seeing that as well in the silver market.
We hope so.
Well, is there anything else that's going on out in the world of silver that folks need to know about? Any innovations or anything that we haven't covered in the markets that you think is noteworthy?
Well, I would just like to conclude with saying that, all your listeners are welcome to come to our website to look at all the materials we have put out.
And I will link to that.
Excellent. For many, many years, we've done these market trend reports, which are very concise reports, typically led by leading researchers or experts in their own particular field. We did one on automotive, which I mentioned earlier. We just put one out on printed and flexible electronics. And shortly we'll be putting one out on silver and global connectivity.
Oh, neat.
We think that's going to be a story that a lot of people will be surprised to read about, because yes, cell phones and your computers and all that contain silver, of course, because it's the best conductor of electricity in terms of metals. But it's also interesting to see how the interplay between your home devices, your automobiles, the other devices you have at home or in the office or in your car are all connected by silver. So that's something that's coming up on the horizon for us.
Yeah, one of the things that I do, you guys do your, I believe it's bi-monthly, but kind of your silver news.
Yes.
Whenever that comes out, I do a little summary and link to it. So we try to promote that information out there for folks, because it's all important information for anybody who's interested in silver and interested in investing, which is primarily what people are following our website are interested in. But as I mentioned at the top, you guys do a fantastic job of getting that information out, and it helps me, gives me stuff to write about. I love when the reports
very
come out.
Good.
So
we do them every other month, 6 editions a year. We'll be putting one out at the end of August, and people find that it's just a fascinating read. We have that translated into Chinese and Spanish. We try to market it to those two countries as well. And the good news is that essentially all of our reports in PDF form are available at no cost to the visitor. So
and it's amazing. You go through some of the technology. You guys cover a lot of the stuff, the research that's going on, particularly. And I find that a lot of the stuff that's going on in medicine and the biological type of stuff, I find all that very, very fascinating. And it's
Well,
like
it is.
every time an issue comes out, it's like, wow, that's, they've come up with something new. It's really pretty amazing.
Right, right. I think inventors, I think manufacturers, I think especially those in the healthcare arena, doctors, scientists, and so forth, are looking at silver increasingly more as a tool to reduce infections.
Mm-hmm.
It is actually, as you know, an antibacterial.
Right.
It's incorporated, as you know, on bandages, on sprays, on EMT vehicles throughout the United States and in other countries. It's all through the hospital rooms. It's in the gowns. It's increasingly being woven into textiles to help fight bacteria. But even more so today, it's being used in conjunction with your smartwatch or your iPhone, your whatever device you have.
Fitbit.
Exactly. And you can monitor and track and your performance on a daily basis. But the ones that are being sewn into the textiles, your clothing, is just equally as interesting.
Yeah.
So
yeah, fascinating stuff. Well, on the show notes page, we will be linking to your website and some of this information. And we'll continue to cover what you're doing. Appreciate very much you taking a little bit of time out of your busy day to talk to us.
It's always a pleasure.
Overview. And so we'll go ahead and wrap it up and let you get back to things you've got going on at the office.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mike. I do appreciate it. And call us anytime. And to all your listeners and viewers out there, please come to the Institute's website. Mike will link to it at the end of the segment. And look forward to seeing y'all. Thank you.
Thank you.